Everyone always says that Micro Four Thirds is supposed to be small and compact, and they miss that in the new bodies. And well, enter the G100, probably the most modern and advanced small camera that Lumix has released that I think a lot of people forget about. Obviously, there's plenty of the older 12, 16 megapixel Micro Four Thirds cameras, but when we're talking about the newest tech, sensors, and menus of any of the small Lumix cameras, the G100 is pretty much one of the only choices. Originally, the G100 was released as Lumix's take on a vlogging camera, but it really had nothing that vloggers actually needed. And honestly, they learned, I think, a lot of lessons from this camera when it came to creating the new full-frame S9. And maybe they meant it was a vlogging camera, like it had a vlog picture profile installed, and someone just took that a little too far in the marketing department. Who knows? But even if the mixed response was somewhat warranted, I think this is a really misunderstood, maybe slightly mismarketed, and in reality, a really fun and handy little camera. And I would say that this camera is definitely not just a master of none, but also a master of fun. So obviously professionally, I use things like the S5 II, the GH6, the GH7, way more, but it's hard to argue that I've got some amazing images with this little camera. It just really embodies that small size that defined Micro Four Thirds for years. But before we get into why I like it, let's talk about some of the weird designs and choices that might have held it back. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on here being negative, but here it goes. The camera has Vlog, but no 10-bit video, which makes using that Vlog a little bit tough.
With good exposure, you can get lucky, but you definitely see a lot more artifacts here than you would otherwise.
None of the famous Panasonic IBIS. There's extra crops at 4K, and the digital stabilization, while making getting stable shots easier, made making wide angles a lot harder, which, you know, so you could either choose for it to be stable and wide, and for vlogging, you kind of need both. Plus, don't get me started on the classic depth from defocus autofocus, which is even a lot worse than even the GH6 was. And, you know, I thought the GH6 was fine, but still not industry leading necessarily. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the record limits, but here, now I did. It's either 10, 15, or 30 minutes, I think, depending on the various modes. Done. Okay, so great. What about photos? Well, there's no dedicated mechanical shutter, so that's apparently not ideal for certain types of photography. At least that's what I've been told.
Google's telling me that it has an electric first curtain shutter, which means it's electric first, and mechanical second, which means it's better than full electric, but not great compared to a mechanical shutter.
There's also a few other compromises, like the lower res EVF, but at least we have one. I'm tired of this. Let's get back to why I like this thing. And the first one that I alluded to was the size. I love the size of Micro Four Thirds cameras, and we all know that the body and the lens size has been increasing steadily over the years, but personally, I don't care about 95% of the time and 95% of situations, but at least having like one or two smaller cameras for travel, going out to eat, or just throwing one extra into a bag, I'm starting to see the value of that, especially if the camera is even halfway capable. Obviously, the S9 kind of takes the cake for that now, but if you want to save a little bit of money and you are just snapping photos here and there, the G100 is pretty great. Having a small camera this advanced with an EVF
And a flippy screen
is a lot more rare than you might think, and so we're gonna call that one a win. And so in that small package, it does pack, like I said, decent quality 4K, even with crops, the newer-ish 20 megapixel sensor, and a lot of other decent specs, which in the right hands can get really good results. Actually, in most hands, you can get really good results, to be honest. So, I mean, let's go into those like bells and whistles I talked about earlier. We've got stuff like live view composite, pre-burst 4K photo, and even more random little things boosting up that photographic capability. I mean, not even the GH6 has half of this stuff. It has a lot of other features as well, varies in quality and usefulness to someone like me, but it's stuff I'm not sure we've ever seen in another Lumix camera, like the really interesting audio system that a lot of the old reviews talk about. I don't really know how amazing this is, but stuff like the Snap Movie for recording quick clips, or a slightly different UI when the screen is pointed forwards versus backwards. And at some point I even found some slimming and beauty filters like on the Sony ZV cameras. Again, I didn't use these very much, but I love how much stuff they put in this camera and how intuitive a lot of it was to use. But obviously, just at the end of the day, that form factor, size, relatively modern buttons and menus and sensor and quality of the final images is what really does it for me. The dynamic range and the color in the photos is honestly pretty similar to what I was getting with the GH5 back in the day. And you can get really good results for such a small crop sensor camera. And because this is an interchangeable lens system, you can use all your big boy lenses, which give a distinct advantage over the compact fixed lens cameras, which are either stuck with a prime or like a really basic 24 to 70-ish. Whereas with this camera, of course, the entire Micro Four Thirds lineup is available to it. You know, some of my favorites are like the 14 to 140. It's a little bit bigger on this type of body, but really does keep the weight overall down and has image stabilization. It's great for trips, vacations, going to the zoo. Although my favorite for any small camera is the Leica 17mm 1.7. The biggest thing I need to get used to with these smaller, cheaper cameras is the single control dial or even no control dial. But with the 15mm, you get an aperture ring where you get that extra point of control back. I can see a ton of people using the slick, smallish package with a wideish 30mm, fast 1.7 aperture. And the lens just performs and looks so much better than the 20mm.
And the kit lens is good too. It's incredibly small, so yeah, very useful.
Although, you know, I do love putting giant lenses on this thing just for no reason. I mean, it's just like, look, little camera, big lens. It's funny. It just is. If it's not funny to you, then there's the door. That's actually just a wall. So who is this thing for? Well, I'd say travel and casual outings, especially if you already have a bunch of Micro Four Thirds lenses around, it's going to be familiar and the lenses are going to fit. It's also nice to just pick up and whip out some easily, obtainable snapshots or, video clips for certain jobs, weddings, things like that. And so, I've even used it as like a throwaway angle when the bride's coming in or something like that. Because I know once it stops recording in 10-15 minutes, she's already going to be here and ready to get married. I'd say it's not bad either for just like tight places, short recordings, like content creation, other types of social media work. It's definitely not a vlogging camera, but it could be a fairly decent content creator camera. Maybe some behind the scenes or street photography would be nice as well. It's small, it's subtle, and it still has decent quality for cropping the images and things like that. And I guess you could use it as like a D or an E camera for like a wedding or event. You're really gonna have to babysit that thing or just kind of be okay with it not lasting the whole event unless the event is really short. And then I guess lastly would just be if you're a Micro Four Thirds enthusiast, collector, this is, for better or for worse, for now, the modern option for Micro Four Thirds. And you can get something cheaper, you can get something a lot more expensive from Olympus, or something way more rare like the GM5 from Panasonic. But at the end of the day, this is the most accessible, most affordable, especially used, and I think almost undoubtedly most feature-packed Micro Four Thirds small camera that Lumix have made. And I think that's worth something, and I really do enjoy it. So maybe it doesn't stick around forever. Maybe one of those more simpler or older or stylish cameras from days past will get my attention. Man, I would love one of those Olympus pens, especially the expensive one, but it's like $1,000, man. Oh my gosh. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video or any of my videos at any point and you're still not subscribed, I'd really appreciate it. And if you do subscribe, see you when I see you.